I bought you to make you suffer." Mountain Man told the fat girl, then suffered from loving her. $50 for the fat one, and I'll even throw in her shame for free." Richard Morrison's voice sliced through the smoky parlor, setting off a wave of crude laughter. Men in dusty coats crowded the banker's grand sitting room, boots muddy on imported rugs, whiskey glasses clinking as they turned to stare at the girl pressed against the far wall. Eleanor Morrison wished she could disappear into the faded rose wallpaper. She stood with her hands knotted in front of her, a worn brown dress pulling tight over her round belly and full hips. At 5'5" and heavy, every ounce of her felt exposed under their gaze. Her golden hair, usually her one point of pride, hung loose and messy around her flushed face, trying and failing to hide how hard she was trembling. "Come on, gentlemen," Morrison drawled, swirling the amber in his glass. "She's healthy. She can scrub floors and peel potatoes, and she eats less than she looks. I should know. I've kept her on scraps for years." The room roared with laughter. Ellie stared at the carpet, hot humiliation burning behind her eyes. She had always known her uncle saw her as a burden. Today, she learned exactly how much that burden was worth. On the left side of the room, a broad man in a stained vest spat tobacco into the fireplace and leaned forward. His name was Briggs, owner of the roughest brothel 2 towns over. Ellie had heard his name whispered in the kitchen, always followed by the word ruin. $40, Briggs said, eyes crawling over her. "She's big enough to last, even if the boys are rough." Her stomach lurched. She dug her nails into her palms to keep from crying. "40?" Morrison scoffed. "She's my own blood. I won't give her away. 50, or she goes to someone who appreciates her value." "Value?" someone snorted. "Only value I see is that she can block a draft if you stand her in front of a window." More laughter. Ellie's cheeks burned hotter. The urge to run clawed at her legs, but there was nowhere to go. She had no money, no friends, no one who would open a door if she knocked. Briggs shrugged. "Fine, 50. I'll take her off your hands and teach her to earn her keep." Morrison lifted his glass in victory. "Going once." The front door slammed open with a crack like a gunshot. Cold mountain air blew into the parlor, snuffing out cigar smoke and conversation in a single breath. Every head turned as a tall figure stepped over the threshold, boots thudding on the floorboards. He was all dark lines and hard edges, long black hair tied back at his neck, a thick beard framing a face cut from stone, a worn trail coat dusted with pine needles and travel. A hunting knife rested at his hip, and gray eyes, cold as January ice on the Wyoming peaks, swept the room once before fixing on Ellie. No one laughed now. "Who in blazes are you?" Morrison demanded, annoyance flickering at having his little performance interrupted. The stranger didn't bother to answer. He took 2 slow steps into the parlor, gaze never leaving the shaking woman by the wall. Something unreadable flickered in those gray eyes when he saw her flinch. "I heard there's a girl for sale," he said at last, voice low and rough from years of wind and smoke. "I'm here to buy her." Briggs bristled. "You're too late, mountain man. I already offered 50. The girl's mine." Silence stretched. The stranger reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and let it drop heavy onto the nearest table. The clink of coins rang louder than any gunshot. $100, he said, still staring at Ellie. "For the fat girl." The room gasped. Even Morrison's greedish smile faltered at the size of the sum. Ellie's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had no idea who this man was or why he would pay twice her price. Only that her life had just been sold again in a single sentence. As you listen to this story from wherever you are in the world, tell me in the comments where you're hearing Ellie's pain from tonight. Ellie had never felt smaller than in the moment the stranger's hand closed around her upper arm, not roughly, but with a firmness that said there was no use resisting. Morrison snatched up the pouch of coins, greed shining in his eyes brighter than any affection he had ever shown her. "A pleasure doing business," Morrison said smoothly. "She's hardy, doesn't talk back, mostly quiet. Feed her enough, she'll work like a mule." The mountain man didn't bother replying. He simply tilted his head toward Ellie. "Come." His voice rumbled like distant thunder, quiet but impossible to ignore. Ellie stumbled after him, her shoes slipping on the polished floor. Her face remained lowered, though she could feel dozens of eyes on her, burning her dignity to ash. At the door, someone muttered loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Must be desperate paying that much for a cow." Another laughed. "Maybe he needs something warm in the winter." Ellie's throat tightened. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of them. Not again. Not ever again. Outside, the spring wind cut through her thin dress. The stranger, James, though she didn't know his name yet, didn't ask if she was cold. He simply kept walking toward a large black stallion tied beside the fence. She hesitated. "Sir, where are we going?" He paused just long enough to look at her. His eyes were unreadable silver gray, assessing her the way a man might assess a tool before buying it. Not cruel, not kind, just distant. "To the mountains," he said. "To work." Ellie swallowed. "Why me?" "Because I chose you." That was all. No explanation, no comfort, nothing to hold on to but a truth that terrified her more than Briggs's brothel ever had. He chose her. For what? He mounted the stallion in one smooth motion and gestured for her to climb up behind him. Ellie's heart raced. She'd never ridden a horse this large. Her legs trembled just looking at it. I'm heavy," she whispered. "I might be too—" "I didn't pay $100 because you're porcelain." His tone stayed flat. "Get on." With shaking hands, Ellie grabbed the saddle horn and struggled to hoist herself up. The stallion shifted under her weight, and she nearly slipped until a strong hand closed around her waist, steadying her as if she weighed nothing more than a sack of feathers. The touch burned through her thin dress. She froze, breath caught in her throat. "Hold on," he said. She dared not question him again. They rode away from the town, leaving behind dust, laughter, and the final scraps of Ellie's old life. The noise faded. The wide plains opened. The mountains loomed ahead, vast, ancient, and merciless. After nearly an hour of silence, Ellie finally gathered the courage to speak. "My uncle? He never asked if I wanted to go. He never asked anything." James barely turned his head. "I didn't ask either." Her chest tightened. I don't understand why someone would spend so much money on someone like me." "Because I had a reason," he said simply. "A reason. Cold, unmistakable. Not affection, not kindness. Something else." "May I ask what reason?" "No." The answer was final, as sharp as the mountain wind. Ellie lowered her head again. She felt foolish for hoping he'd be different from the world she'd always known. But people didn't change. They never had. As they climbed higher into the pine forest, the air grew colder, cleaner. Sunlight filtered through tall trees, casting long shadows across the trail. James rode without speaking, his posture straight, his gaze fixed ahead like a man who had walked this path 1,000 times. Ellie studied him in pieces, the scars along his knuckles, the rope burn marks on his wrist, the broad shoulders beneath the dark coat. This was a man shaped by wilderness and violence, a man who looked like he'd broken more things than he'd ever fixed, a man who didn't belong in parlors full of fat bankers and stained whiskey glasses. He belonged out here, where the wind was fierce and the silence truthful, and she had no idea where she belonged anymore. By sundown, they reached an abandoned logging shack. James dismounted and jerked his chin toward the door. "You'll sleep inside?" Ellie blinked in surprise. "And you?" "Outside. But it's cold. It won't kill me." His voice held finality, though not cruelty. Simply fact. Inside, the shack was dusty but dry. A single wooden bench sat beside the far wall, and a cold fireplace occupied the center. Ellie wrapped her arms around herself. She felt the day's weight pressing on her chest, heavy and hopeless. James appeared in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by fading light. "You'll start work tomorrow," he said. "What kind of work?" "All kinds." He studied her for a moment. Not lust, not pity, just calculation, like he was deciding how much use he could get from something he already owned. "One more thing," he said. Ellie held her breath. "Don't ask again why I bought you." His voice dipped lower, darker. "You won't like the answer." Her pulse hammered painfully. "Yes, sir." James Hartley nodded once, then stepped back into the night. The door creaked shut, leaving Ellie alone in the dim light with nothing but her fear and a single truth. She wasn't free, not anymore, and whatever reason he had for bringing her here, it wasn't kindness. Dawn broke cold and blue across the Wyoming peaks. Ellie woke on the wooden bench with her neck stiff and her limbs heavy, as if the night itself had settled on her bones. She rubbed sleep from her swollen eyes and listened. No voices, no footsteps, only the distant rush of wind through the pines. James must already be awake. She braced her hands against the rough bench and pushed herself upright, her belly tightening beneath her dress. Every movement reminded her she didn't belong in a world built for hard men and harder winters. But she had no choice. Not anymore. Outside, the morning air sliced through her thin dress like a blade. James was already saddling the stallion, his movements precise and quiet. His dark coat hung heavy on his broad shoulders, and mist curled from his breath like smoke. "Eat," he said without turning, jerking his chin toward a tin cup and a piece of cold cornbread placed on a rock. Ellie picked it up with numb fingers. "Thank you." He didn't answer. A man who lived in silence, she thought. A man welded shut. They rode north into a land that felt untouched by God. Tall pines crowded the trail, their bark black with morning frost. The path wound up steep slopes, mud and stone shifting under the stallion's hooves. A cold wind tore through the valley, carrying the scent of snow even though spring had barely begun. Ellie held the saddle horn, her round body bouncing awkwardly with each step of the horse. I'm sorry if I slow us down," she managed between breaths. "You don't," James said simply. That was all. No comfort, no softness, just fact. But fact was better than cruelty. As they crossed a narrow ridge, Ellie glanced down the steep drop and felt her stomach lurch. If she fell, her body would roll and break against the rocks far below. She froze, white-knuckled on the saddle horn. James felt her tense. "Don't look down." I wasn't going to," You were. Her cheeks flushed. I'm just afraid of heights. You'll get over it. Not reassuring, but strangely grounding. Hours passed in silence. Ellie's thighs ached from gripping the saddle, her spine throbbed, and her stomach growled from the meager breakfast. Yet James never complained, never asked her to be faster or quieter. He just kept riding, steady as a storm rolling across the plains. By midday, clouds thickened overhead. The wind sharpened. James finally pulled the horse to a stop beside a fallen pine. We rest here. Ellie slid off the horse with a graceless thud. Her legs buckled beneath her weight, and she hit the ground hard, gasping. She heard James's boots crunch on dry needles. For a moment, she expected a reprimand. Instead, he extended a hand. Not warm, not gentle, just offered. Ellie blinked up at him. You don't have to. Take it, he said. She did. His grip was strong, calloused, steadying her as she stood. When she let go, her palm tingled with leftover heat. James pulled a packet of dried venison from his coat and handed her a strip. Eat. Ellie hesitated. Are you sure? If I wasn't, I wouldn't give it to you. She bit it, salty, tough, but good enough to quiet the hollow ache in her belly. When she finished, James crouched beside the pine trunk, scanning the sky. Storm coming? Ellie wrapped her arms around herself. Is it dangerous? Depends. He stood, tightening the saddle straps. Storms don't kill people. Unprepared men do. Her chest tightened. Will we make it to the cabin before it starts? No. He mounted the horse and extended his arm toward her. Come on. Ellie reached for him. He pulled her up easily behind him. The wind howled louder as the sky darkened. Shadows swallowed the trail. By late afternoon, sleet began to fall, sharp pellets stinging Ellie's cheeks and soaking through her thin dress. She shivered violently. James felt it. Without speaking, he reached back, grabbed his thick fur-lined coat, and held it out. Ellie stared. For me? You'll freeze without it. Her voice broke. Thank you. Don't thank me, he muttered. It's practical. But when she wrapped herself in the coat, warm, smelling faintly of pine smoke and leather, she couldn't stop the tears burning in her eyes. It had been years since someone handed her warmth. The trail narrowed into a ravine, and the wind grew fiercer. The storm cracked open with a roar, dumping snow and ice like a vengeful god emptying his fists. Ellie clutched James's coat tighter, pressing her cheek against his back. His muscles tensed at the contact, but he didn't push her away. Instead, he shifted slightly, giving her more room, bracing her with his steady presence. A fallen tree blocked the path ahead. James dismounted, boots sinking into mud and melting snow. Stay on the horse. He wrapped the reins around a branch, then braced his hands against the trunk. Ellie expected him to struggle. He lifted it as if it weighed nothing. Her breath caught. This was not a banker's man, nor a town sheriff, nor a saloon brawler. This was a creature carved from the mountain itself, a man shaped by cold and loss and rage, a man who could break anything he touched, including her. They pushed on until the storm swallowed the afternoon light, turning the world to a blur of white and shadow. Ellie could barely see James's silhouette, but his deep voice cut through the wind. Just a little farther, he said. Cabin's near. Near. Relief swelled in her chest. But then the stallion reared. A crack echoed through the trees. Branches snapped. Something moved in the forest beyond the trail. Ellie's breath hitched. What was that? James already had his rifle in hand. Wolves, he said calmly. A big pack. Ellie froze, heart slamming painfully. He stepped closer to her, gripping her arm, not gently, but protectively. You stay behind me, he said, no matter what. Thunder growled overhead. Snow swept around them, and in the darkness of the pines, yellow eyes blinked open, one pair, then two, then five. The wolves had found them. The wind roared like a living creature, whipping snow into spirals around them. Ellie clung to James's coat, breath shallow, terror pounding in her veins. The wolves padded out from between the trees, gray shapes with hungry eyes, their fur bristling against the storm. James raised his rifle with steady, unhurried precision. Stay behind me, he repeated quietly. Ellie staggered off the horse, legs trembling, and pressed her back to a pine trunk. She could barely see James through the veil of snow, but his silhouette stood firm, broad shoulders, steady aim, unflinching calm, a wall between her and the wild. The first wolf lunged. A sharp crack split the air, echoing through the valley. The animal fell in a spray of snow, and the rest scattered, startled by the sudden violence. But hunger made them bold. They regrouped, circling. James fired a warning shot into the air. The pack retreated into the shadows of the pines, their glowing eyes fading. Only when the forest fell silent did James lower his rifle. He turned toward Ellie. You hurt? His voice wasn't cold, not soft either, but something in between, something almost human. Ellie shook her head, breath shaking. No. He stepped closer, sweeping the tree line one last time before taking her arm. We move, now. They pressed forward through the storm, the snow rising to Ellie's calves. She stumbled more than once. Each time she did, James's hand closed around her elbow, steadying her without a word. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, until finally, through the swirling white, she saw the outline of a cabin perched on a rise, smoke barely visible from its chimney. James exhaled, a subtle sound of relief. Home. Home. The word stung her chest with something she didn't have a name for. He pushed the heavy door open and ushered her inside. Warmth washed over her, golden light flickering from a wide stone fireplace, thick logs crackling as flames danced. A carved table stood in the center of the room, a fur-lined chair beside it. A bed, large and neatly made, nestled against the far wall. It was more than a cabin. It was a life. James shrugged off his coat and took Ellie's from her shoulders, hanging both near the fire to dry. Sit. She obeyed, sinking onto the edge of the bed, her legs numb. James crouched in front of her, assessing. His gray eyes swept over her flushed cheeks and shaken hands. Give me your fingers. Ellie hesitated, then extended her hand. His large, calloused palm wrapped around hers, and she flinched at the sudden warmth. James rubbed her chilled fingers between his own, restoring circulation. You almost got frostbite, he muttered. That's my fault, Ellie whispered. I slowed us down. He shook his head. Storm would have hit regardless. He let go of her hand, stood, and crossed the room to the fireplace. Ellie watched in silence as he ladled something steaming from a pot into a tin bowl. Eat, he said, placing it gently in her hands. She stared at the stew, thick, fragrant, full of potatoes and venison. The warmth seeped into her fingers, her chest tightening. Is this for me? Yes. He didn't touch his own bowl until she began to eat. The first sip warmed her from the inside out. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. James stiffened. Soup's not that bad. No. Ellie whispered, wiping her cheeks. I haven't eaten a full meal in a while. Silence. James looked down at his bowl, jaw tensing. Something dark flickered in his eyes, not anger, guilt. When they finished, he stood and pulled a thick wool blanket from a trunk. You'll sleep by the fire? It's warmest here. Ellie blinked. Where will you sleep? He nodded toward the bed. There. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I can sleep on the floor if... I said what I said, he interrupted. You nearly froze. I won't risk it. Ellie lay down on a bed of furs beside the hearth. The fire cast soft light on her face as she curled under the blanket. She listened to James move around the cabin, checking the windows, securing the door, tending to the horse in the storm-soaked night. Finally, he crossed the room, the floor creaking slightly under his weight. She sensed him watching her before he spoke. You'll work here, he said. Cook, mend, keep the cabin in order. I won't mistreat you as long as you work. She swallowed. Yes, sir. He hesitated. And another rule. Ellie braced herself. What is it? James's voice dropped, quiet, strained, as if dragging the words from some place he kept locked away. Don't be afraid to eat. Her breath caught. She almost thought she misheard him. He continued, softer than she thought he could speak. Hunger weakens you, and I don't need someone weak under my roof. Her chest tightened at the strange mixture of harshness and reluctant concern. Yes, sir, she said again, this time not from fear, but from something that felt dangerously close to gratitude. James stepped back, extinguishing the lantern. Get some sleep. Storm will trap us in for a few days. As the fire crackled beside her, warmth finally settling in her bones, Ellie let her heavy eyes close. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without hunger gnawing at her stomach, and James Hartley, mountain man, exile, stranger who claimed he bought her for reasons she didn't yet know, kept watch over her long after she slept, his gaze unreadable in the firelight. Because the storm outside wasn't the only one he was fighting. The storm raged for 3 days. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, the world outside erased beneath a shifting blanket of white. Inside, time moved differently, slow, quiet, heavy with unspoken things. Ellie woke each morning to the crackle of a fire James had already lit and the smell of something warm simmering in the pot. She cooked. She swept the floor. She mended a torn sleeve on his coat. They spoke only when necessary, but silence can reveal as much as words. James watched the way Ellie's hands worked, gentle, meticulous, trembling only when she thought he wasn't looking. Ellie watched James move through the cabin, efficient, disciplined, carrying pain in his posture like another layer of clothing. On the third evening, as snowfall thickened into a curtain outside, a new sound broke the quiet. The distant groan of shifting ice, followed by a low rumble vibrating through the earth. Ellie's spoon froze mid-air. What was that? Snowdrift collapsing, James answered without looking up. Nothing to fear. Nothing to fear. Easy for a man built like a storm to say. He finished his meal and stood. I'll check the roof. You shouldn't go out there, Ellie said, surprising herself with the boldness of the words. The wind is too strong. You let me worry about that, she swallowed. Can I help? James paused in the doorway, turning just enough for her to see his profile, sharp in the firelight. You get blown into a ravine. Ellie's cheeks flushed. I only meant... I know what you meant. A beat. But you stay inside. He shut the door behind him, leaving Ellie alone with the fire and her own racing thoughts. She watched the door, waiting for his shadow to return. Minutes stretched, each more anxious than the last. When the door finally opened again, James stepped inside, dusted with snow, hair wet, breath steaming in the warm air. "All clear," he said, dropping his coat near the fire. Ellie exhaled softly. I was worried." He froze, as if the word itself struck him. "You don't need to worry about me." But something in his eyes shifted, an emotion too quick to name. Ellie stood, gathering the bowls. "Did the cold hurt your hands?" James flexed them. Fresh cuts glimmered across his knuckles. "Ice burns." He shrugged. "Barely." Without thinking, Ellie took one of his hands in hers. Both froze. Her fingers were soft, warm, small against his scarred palm. James's breath hitched, barely, but enough for her to notice. She lifted his hand to examine the wounds. "You should have told me," she murmured. "I can help with this." His voice was rough. "It's nothing. It's bleeding." He withdrew his hand sharply, almost like a man afraid of his own reaction. "Sit down." Ellie obeyed, but uncertainty knotted in her stomach. James moved around the cabin, checking windows, pacing once, twice, the tension rolling off him like heat from a forge. Finally, he spoke. "You asked me before why I bought you." Ellie's breath stilled. "Yes," she whispered. He stood by the hearth, the fire casting amber light across the deep scars on his forearms. His eyes remained fixed on the flames as if they held the only truth he could bear to face. "I'm going to tell you now," he said, "but you won't like what you hear." Ellie's fingers tightened around the blanket. "I want the truth." "It wasn't because you were useful." His voice was low, pained. "Or because you could work." Silence. Ellie's heart pounded. "I didn't choose you," James said. "I chose Morrison's blood." The words struck like a lash. She blinked. "My uncle?" James nodded once. "Richard Morrison destroyed my life, burned my family's land, framed me, took everything I loved." He paused, jaw tight. "And when he started drowning in debts, I watched. I waited. I wanted him to lose something precious." Ellie felt the floor fall away beneath her feet. "So you bought me?" she whispered. "To punish him?" "Yes." Her breath shattered. Pain bloomed hot in her chest. James's voice was quiet, but brutal in its honesty. "I meant to bring you here and let the mountains break you. I wanted him to know you lived in misery, that he couldn't stop it." For a moment, Ellie couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. All the warmth these days had given her, all the careful meals, the fire, the shared silences, cracked in an instant. She rose slowly, blanket slipping from her shoulders. "So everything, all of this, was revenge?" James's throat worked. He looked at her now, truly looked, and something tortured flickered in his eyes. "It was," he admitted. "At first." Ellie swallowed a sob. "And now?" Now there was raw silence. James took a step toward her, then another. "When I saw you by that parlor wall," he said quietly, "you were trembling, terrified, alone. I thought you were like him, but you're not." His voice broke, just for a breath. "You're nothing like him." Ellie's tears spilled over. "If you hated him so much, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to look at me the way I look at him." The confession hit her harder than the truth. Thunder rolled outside. The walls shuddered from the storm's force. But inside the cabin, the storm was quieter, smaller, more heartbreaking. Ellie wiped her cheeks. "I don't know what you want from me anymore." James approached slowly, every step heavy. "I don't want revenge anymore," he said. "Not if it means hurting someone who never deserved it." His voice dropped to something almost fragile. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, not now, maybe not ever, but I want you to know," he swallowed, "I regret what I meant to do to you every day." Ellie stared at him through tears. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you." "I know." His eyes softened in a way she'd never seen. "But I want to earn that." For a long moment, neither moved. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the storm howled. Inside the cabin, pain and truth hung between them like a bridge half built. Steady enough to stand on, yet fragile enough to break with one misstep. The storm eased overnight, leaving the world outside glazed in ice and the sky pale with dawn. Ellie hadn't slept. She sat wrapped in a blanket near the dying fire, staring at the knots in the wooden floor while her heart twisted itself into tighter and tighter knots of its own. James hadn't slept either. She could hear him moving outside before sunrise, splitting wood with ferocious precision, every strike echoing like a confession he couldn't voice. By mid-morning, the sky cleared. A single gunshot shattered the quiet. Ellie shot upright. James burst through the cabin door, rifle in hand, eyes hard. "Stay back!" "What happened?" she whispered. He didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the tree line. Then Ellie heard it. Hooves crunching through snow, men shouting, the creak of wagon wheels, not wolves, not weather. People. James moved to the window and cursed under his breath. "Damn it!" Ellie approached carefully. "Who is it?" "Morrison's men." Ice crawled down her spine. "My uncle sent them?" James didn't look at her. "He must have heard you never made it to Briggs's brothel. If he's desperate enough for money, he'll come to reclaim the only thing he still owns." Ellie felt her knees weaken. "But he sold me. He took the money." "Men like Morrison don't care about deals when pride's at stake," James growled. "And if he thinks I kidnapped you instead of buying you, he'll spin any story that suits him." Ellie pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Shame, fear, and anger collided in her chest. What will happen if he takes me back?" James lowered his rifle, his jaw clenching so tightly a muscle ticked. "He won't take you. Not now." "You can't fight him alone," Ellie whispered. "There are multiple riders." He finally turned to her. His voice was low. "Ellie, I'm not afraid of them." She believed him. That terrified her even more. The voices grew louder. Hooves thudded closer. James moved quickly, pulling Ellie behind the thick table, positioning himself between her and the door. "If shooting starts, stay down. If they break the windows, crawl into the pantry. Do not come out unless I tell you." Ellie's breath came in shallow bursts. "I don't want you to get hurt because of me." "Too late for that," he muttered. Before she could ask what he meant, fists pounded on the door. "Hartley, open up!" Ellie went rigid. She'd recognize that voice anywhere. Sheriff Avery Willis, a man bought by her uncle and kept loyal through bribes and whiskey, a man who never once listened when she begged for help. James didn't open the door. Another voice joined in, nasal, cold, cruel. "James Hartley, you have something that belongs to me." Her uncle. Ellie's stomach dropped. She shivered so violently her teeth clicked. Memories flooded back. Him grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise, calling her dead weight, mocking her body, reminding her every day that she was lucky he even fed her. James stood at the door, unflinching. "She doesn't belong to you anymore, Morrison. You sold her." "I changed my mind," Morrison snarled. "You tricked me, Hartley. You used my niece to get to me." "You used her long before I ever came," James growled. A tense pause. Then the sheriff's booming voice. "Open this damn door or we'll break it down." James turned to Ellie. "Stay behind the table." "No," Ellie said suddenly. He blinked. "Ellie." "No." Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "I'm done hiding while men decide my life." Outside, boots crunched through snow. More men dismounted. The cabin walls trembled from the thud of bodies lining up at the door. James stepped toward Ellie, lowering his rifle. "Listen to me. This isn't your fight." "Yes," she whispered, "it is." He stared at her. Really stared. And for the first time, he didn't see the girl sold for $50. He saw a woman who'd endured years of cruelty and still stood. Slowly, James nodded. "Say the word, and I'll stand beside you." Ellie swallowed hard and lifted her chin. "Open the door." James unlatched it. Snow-blinding light flooded the cabin. Sheriff Willis stood in front, hand hovering near his revolver. Morrison sat atop a horse, cheeks red from cold and fury. "There she is," he spat. "Get her." Willis stepped forward. James raised his rifle. "Touch her, and you'll lose the hand you used." The sheriff froze. Morrison scoffed. "She's my blood. She belongs to my household." Ellie stepped out from behind James before he could stop her. Her voice trembled but rose clear across the clearing. "I do not belong to you." Morrison glared down at her. "Ungrateful girl, I raised you, fed you, kept a roof over your oversized head." "You starved me," Ellie snapped. "You worked me like a servant, sold me like cattle. What part of that is raising me?" Gasps rippled through the riders. Morrison's face mottled purple. "You dare shame me in public?" Ellie took a shaky breath and lifted her chin. "You shamed yourself the day you put a price on me." James's fists tightened at his sides. Morrison snarled at him. "You think you can hide behind her speeches, Hartley? I know exactly what you are, a convict, a murderer." James didn't flinch. Ellie stepped closer to him, voice steadying. "You framed him, just like you lied about me." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Enough!" Morrison shouted. "Ellie, get on that horse or you'll regret it." Ellie moved closer to James until her shoulder brushed his arm. "No." "You ungrateful. She's not going anywhere," James cut in. Morrison's eyes gleamed with victory. "Then you admit it. You kidnapped her." James's gun rose a fraction. "I paid for her." "You bought her to hurt me?" Morrison hissed. "And that makes her a hostage." "No," Ellie said. "He bought me because you gave him no choice but to rescue me from your cruelty." James stiffened at the word rescue, as if he didn't deserve it, as if the word burned. Morrison pointed at her, spittle flying. "You stupid girl. You think this mountain brute cares about you? You think he kept you alive out of kindness?" Ellie faltered. Pain flashed through James's eyes. Morrison leaned forward, sneering. "You mean nothing. Not to me. Not to anyone." James stepped forward, voice low enough to shake snow from the trees. "She means everything." The clearing went dead silent. Even the wind stopped to listen. Sheriff Willis swallowed. "Hartley, you don't want to do something stupid." James's voice dropped into a growl. "Try to take one more step, Sheriff. Just one." The sheriff hesitated, then stepped back. Morrison realized he had lost control. The power he wielded in town meant nothing here, where the mountains answered to James Hartley alone. "Fine," Morrison spat. "Let's see how long she lasts when winter gets worse. Let's see if she still wants you when she learns the rest of your sins." He jerked his horse around. "We'll be back." The group rode away, disappearing through the pines. Ellie watched until the last shadow vanished. Her knees buckled, but James caught her instantly, his large hand steady on her arms. "You shouldn't have stood in front of them like that," he murmured. Ellie looked up, eyes shining with fear and pride. "And you shouldn't have stood in front of me alone." James's breath hitched. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't the fat girl sold for scraps. She had a voice, and she had just used it to choose him. Inside the cabin, the fire waited. Outside, danger loomed. But for the first time in years, Ellie didn't shrink. She stood beside the man the world feared, and for the first time, he seemed afraid of only one thing: losing her. The forest swallowed Morrison's men until not even their hoofbeats echoed back. Only then did James ease his grip on Ellie's arms. "Let's get inside," he murmured. His voice had lost its edge. It was low now, quiet, rough, almost shaken. Ellie had never heard him like that. The man who could stand against wolves and men with guns suddenly looked as if she were the one thing in the world capable of breaking him. Inside, the cabin felt warmer than before. Fire crackling, soft shadows moving across the wooden walls. Ellie settled onto the fur-covered bench near the hearth, her legs still trembling from the confrontation. James crouched by the fire, feeding it fresh logs. Sparks leapt upward, lighting the side of his face. "You shouldn't have stood in front of them," he said quietly. Ellie folded her hands together. "I couldn't hide any more." "You could have been taken. Then you would have come for me." James looked up sharply. She wasn't wrong. He knew it. She knew he knew it. The truth hung between them like smoke, visible, swirling, impossible to deny. He rose, rubbing the back of his scarred hand against his jaw. "You're stronger than you think, Ellie." She laughed, a small, fragile sound. "I never feel strong." "You were today." Silence fell again, but it wasn't tense. It was soft, heavy with things neither knew how to say. James walked to the window, scanning the tree line. "They'll come again." Ellie's stomach tightened. "What will we do?" "Prepare." His voice hardened, but only with determination. "If Morrison wants a fight, I'll end it. But this time, I won't let you be part of the cost." She stepped closer. "James." He turned, and the anger in him melted the moment their eyes met. Something tender, something raw pulled at the corners of his mouth. "You stood beside me," he said, almost breathless. "No one has ever done that." Ellie swallowed. "No one ever let me." A long, slow silence. Then James took a step toward her. "Ellie," he murmured, voice breaking in ways his scars never had. "You're not a burden. You're not something to sell or use or control." Her breath caught. He took another step. The space between them shrank like snow under a rising sun. "You're a woman who faced a monster today and didn't look away." Ellie felt her heart press painfully against her ribs. "You protected me. I'll keep protecting you." His jaw tightened. "Not because I bought you, not because of revenge, but because—" His voice faltered. Ellie's pulse quickened. "Because what, James?" The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Outside, wind stirred the pines. Inside, James closed the last few inches between them. "Because you matter to me," he said softly. Ellie's breath trembled. "I don't know how to trust that." "I know." He touched her hand, lightly, carefully, like she might shatter. "Let me earn it." Slowly. Her eyes glistened. I'm afraid. So am I. The admission stunned her more than his confession. He raised her hand to his chest, laying it over his heartbeat, strong and steady beneath his shirt. "You're safe here," he whispered, "if you'll have this place as yours." Ellie's throat tightened. That simple sentence, spoken in that deep, rough voice, cracked something open inside her. Not fear, not uncertainty, but warmth, pure and terrifying. Tears slid down her cheeks. James cupped her jaw with one hand, thumb brushing away a tear. "It's your home now, Ellie." She hadn't had a home in 15 years. Ellie leaned into his palm, closing her eyes. "Then I want to stay." James exhaled shakily, forehead touching hers. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Good." For a long moment, they stayed like that, breath mingling, heart steadying, the soft glow of the fire wrapping around them like a long-awaited embrace. He didn't kiss her. He didn't rush her. He simply stood there, letting her choose him in silence. And she did. When Ellie finally spoke, her voice was a fragile thread. "Do you really think love can survive everything outside that door?" James brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "If it's real, it can face a whole damn world." Ellie closed her eyes against a fresh wave of tears. Maybe love wasn't here yet, but the door to it was wide open, and the mountains, watching through the cabin window, held their breath. Stories like this don't end at a cabin door or with a whispered promise in the dark. They linger, like warmth after a long winter, like hope refusing to die even when the world tries to crush it. If you've stayed with Ellie and James until now, then maybe it's because something in their journey speaks to you. Maybe you know what it feels like to be underestimated. Maybe you know what it means to carry a hurt that no one else sees. Or maybe you simply believe that even the hardest hearts can still learn how to soften. Wherever you are in the world, curled under blankets, on a late-night drive, sitting alone in a quiet room, I want you to know this. Every comment you leave, every word you share, reminds me that stories connect us across distance, across time, across whatever storms we're facing. So tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And do you still believe that love, when it finally finds us, can be strong enough to stand against everything outside the cabin door? If you do, then don't go far. The next story might be the one written just for you.